Happy Veterans Day to everybody who served, and thank you for your service. I am Xarkun. This is World of Warships Legends. Today we're going to take another look at the legendary tier Spanish cruiser Castilla, but it's not really the ship I want to talk about. It's the commander, Pascual Cervera y Topete. He received a buff, or a change, I guess you could say, during the November 2025 update. A new skill was added to his skill tree in the third row. I'll show you the build on screen here before we get too much further into it, and mostly what I want to talk about is the new skill with the name Strategic Premonition, but it's probably best to review the rest of the build before we really get too deeply into the skill. As you can see from what I showed you on the screen, our inspirations are Mikawa for better concealment, and then Sims for more HP. Sims is there because in his legendary row of skills, Pascual has the Honorable Service skill. That's the key feature to him, I would say. It adds another set of shells to the ready rack base. You get 2. This gives you 3 when you run Honorable Sacrifice, but it reduces the HP, and it also massively increases the main battery reload time. So Sims is there to mitigate the reduction of HP, because I don't really think reducing HP on a cruiser is a great idea, and I want to mitigate that rather poor trade-off. Now, in this part of the battle here, where we've got an Alaska B bow tanking us, this is going to lead me into the reason why I don't think using Strategic Premonition is all that useful. You can see we've got the AP loaded, and the Alaska is angled to us, and he's going to improve the angle as he reverses. Therefore, the AP is not going to be all that effective. 630 damage there, 4k there into his superstructure, that's not too bad. And then, I don't know how much that was as he goes dark, but in any case, I don't think it's all that arguable that in this situation with a bow tanking Alaska, the HE is probably a better choice because it's going to pen his armor scheme much more easily than the AP would, and it also has the ability to start fires. So I think we'd be getting better damage out of the HE, and we're switching to it now, but we had to wait the full reload time to do it. Keep that in mind, and we'll talk about the Strategic Premonition versus the other choices in that row, but keep in mind also we have the Ingenious skill, which I think is useful on the Spanish cruisers. That's in Pascual's first row. It shows you how many enemy ships are aiming at you. We can see 2 of them right now, but the better thing it does is improve the turret traverse speed. Turret traverse, as the old content creator who no longer is with us, he didn't die, he just left, T-Bull. Well, he always used to say that the turret traverse time was kind of like a hidden DPM stat. The worse the turret traverse time, the longer it takes for the main battery guns to get on target, and if you can't get your main battery guns on target, you can't utilize the DPM. Therefore, slower turret traverse time means worse DPM. You can see the logic there, and I agree with it, which is why I think Ingenious is valuable for the turret traverse buff, more so than the amount of ships that are aiming at you. Then in Pascual's second row of skills, we've got Forewarned Command. That gives you a 10% reload buff when you are spotted by the enemy. However, it reduces the time, or rather increases the time it takes for your detect to go back down to normal after firing the main battery guns. Normally on every ship, it's a 20-second penalty. You fire your guns, your concealment blooms out to the maximum gun range for 20 seconds. Then it goes back down to normal, but with this, well, you'd have to wait longer than 20 seconds. Don't quite know what the math is, but it's probably like 24-25 seconds. Not maybe a huge difference, but enough to make you get damaged when maybe you otherwise wouldn't be. Then, of course, we get to Strategic Premonition in the third row. We were running that for this battle, and what it does is reduce the ready rack reload time when fully maxed by 16%. Now, that sounds like a gigantic buff. All the buffs in this game are usually percentage-based, and 16% is quite significant, but it only sounds that way on paper. Once we examine the actual specs page with the actual numbers, you'll see that it's not very useful. But also, keep in mind, and we should be able to see it here, you see how we fired like 2 or 3 salvos of the ready rack and the reticle is starting to turn orange by the white? That is because the ready rack is reloading each salvo individually after we fire. That's the other part of the skill. The ready rack reloads 1 shell at a time if shells remain. Loading each shell takes the full reload time. Firing resets the process. Now that sounds like a useful thing because without that, you have to fire all 2 or all 3 salvos of the ready rack before the entire thing reloads. You can't just fire 1 salvo and then have it reload without that skill. And that's, I suppose, the true value of the skill, but keep in mind, you fire 1 salvo, you have to suffer the entire reload time before that salvo gets reloaded and you're back up to full capacity. So I don't really think that's all that useful. And then we should also mention in the 4th row of skills we've got Fixated, which improves the main battery Sigma and main battery Dispersion. But back to Strategic Premonition. I think the reason you don't want to use this skill is because of the opportunity cost. The other 2 choices in Pascual's 3rd row of skills are number 1, Sponge, which I don't really think is worth using at all. It reduces incoming damage for cruisers by 6%, so maybe makes you a little bit more survivable. Also buffs armaments HP by 20% and reduces armaments repair time by 20%. But it's really the other skill, which is called On Second Thought, that I think is really valuable to the Spanish cruisers, and I don't see why you would give it up to use the new skill, Strategic Premonition. On Second Thought reduces shell type switching if all main battery guns are fully loaded by 55% when fully maxed. So that's more than half of the reload time. And it also reduces the main battery reload time by 5%. Earlier on, when we were shooting at that Alaska with the AP, had we had our guns fully loaded, we could have hit the square button if we were running on second thought, and then instead of having to wait the full reload time, we would wait about 12, maybe 13 seconds before our main battery switched from the AP to the HE in order to better damage the Alaska in that situation. And you could think of it the opposite way too. Maybe we've got a broadside cruiser in front of us, or even a broadside battleship like the Conqueror. We've got the HE loaded, but we would much rather switch to the AP in order to get citadels on the cruiser, or just get AP pen damage on the battleship. These are 254mm guns on the Castilla after all, so they're going to do terrible damage to cruiser broadsides with citadels and all that, and they're gonna shave a lot of HP off battleship broadsides too, particularly battleships that don't have the heaviest broadside armor, like the Conqueror, for example, which has 32. These guns can do a number on a broadside like that. And of course, what if we had AP loaded here against this Shimakaze? We'd want to switch to this HE because it's going to demolish the Shimakaze in the span of 2 salvos there. There he goes. That's our first kill of the game, actually. And if this battle looks familiar to you, by the way, it's because it happened on one of my more recent streams. Anyway, before it ends, we should talk about the actual numbers that these skills give you. So I'm going to look at the specs page for Castilla now with Strategic Premonition on the commander. And if we take a look at the main battery reload time, the full reload time is 30.2 seconds. And then the ready rack reload time, meaning the time between each salvo in the ready rack, is 2.1. If we switch to on second thought, then the full reload time on the main battery guns becomes 28.6 seconds, which is only a 2-second buff, but 28 seconds is certainly better than 30. And then the ready rack reload time becomes 2.5. So all Strategic Premonition is doing is after you fire 1 salvo on the ready rack, it's reloading, but it's going to take the full 30 seconds to become fully reloaded. And then the time between the salvos in the ready rack is reduced by a whopping total of 0.4 seconds, 2.5 to 2.1. I don't think that's any kind of meaningful difference in the gameplay. It's much more meaningful if you use on second thought, and then you have the ability to relatively quickly switch between AP or HE when the shells are fully reloaded. I think that, given the design of these Spanish cruisers, is going to be much more useful to you much more of the time than the strategic premonition skills. And so therefore, if you have Pascual, which my voice is breaking up now. If you have Pascual, which I don't know how many of you do because he was a calendar reward, and I'm not 100% sure if you can obtain him otherwise as of yet, but if you have him, I would much more recommend running on second thought than strategic premonition. I think you're going to get a lot more use out of it. And as this battle comes to a close with these torpedoes against the GK and we get over 200,000 damage, my final thoughts on this are, I don't know why you would take strategic premonition over on second thought. The opportunity cost is too great, and while I like the idea of the individual shells in the reload or in the ready rack reloading after you fire them, well, I think in theory that's helpful. I think the ultimate design of this skill is not all that great. In fact, I would recommend Wargaming take a second look at the design of the skill. I think there are probably some things they could do that would improve it and potentially make it worth taking over on second thought. Namely, instead of buffing the reload time on the ready rack, buff the reload time on the main battery altogether. That might make it more worth using if you can't switch your shells instantaneously. Anyway, sorry for my voice problems. Hope you enjoyed this video. If so, give it a thumbs up, consider subscribing if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.